Good morning to our respected panelists, Dr. Ramil T. Bayani and Ma'am Lovely R. Prieto. We are the group Z3072 with the research titled Anyang Hasayo, a correlational study on the language influence of K-pop to the speaking competence of students. Now for the overview or the introduction of what is our study all about. The ability to communicate effectively across cultural barriers has become a crucial skill, and the world's politics and economics are dependent on individuals' ability to do so. Language is inextricably linked to the speaker, and legitimacy refers to the relationship between linguistic resources and the speaker's social position and capacity to speak authoritatively in various social contexts. This larger sense of competence leads to the realization that a language is only as valuable as the people who speak it. Now, speaking is one of the four primary skills required for effective communication in any language. Speaking proficiency should be cultivated in tandem with the other skills so that students' capacity to communicate is enhanced. Now, K-pop also built relationships through bridging global and local K-pop fans as part of global cultural content. Through the internet and mobile technology, K-pop fandoms have created a transnational cultural community. And the Hallyu Wave has been a part of the influence to some in learning and speaking another language. So simply the objective of this study is to know whether there is really a significant relationship between the language influence of K-pop to the speaking competence of students.
So now let's go to the research questionnaire of this study. So this study contains part one and part two. So the part one of this study is a dependent variable, which is the language influence, and it is shown that these are our questionnaires that our informants respond to. So now I'm going to discuss how our informants um, answer our questions. So for the range of means, we have 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So it also have its own descriptive equivalent and interpretation. So 5, we have the descriptive equivalent for strongly agree, and the interpretation is that it means that the Korean language is very influential to the speaking competence of the students. So for the range means of 4, we have the descriptive equivalent of agree, which means that the Korean language is influential to the speaking competence of the students. Now for 3, we have the 3, and its descriptive equivalent is neutral, and it means that the Korean language may be influential or not to the speaking competence of the students. So for 2, the descriptive equivalent is disagree, and it means that the Korean language is not influential to the speaking competence of the students. And for 1, we have strongly disagree, or it means that the Korean language is not influential at all to the speaking competence of the students. So next, we have the part 2, which is the speaking competence. The part 2, which is the independent variable of this study, which is the speaking competence. So we have also here our questions for our informants. So the range of means, just like the first indicator, we have also the range of means here with the 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And it also have its own descriptive equivalent and an interpretation. So for 5, we have strongly agree, and that means that the Korean speaking competence is greatly influenced by the language itself. So 4, we have agree, and it means that the Korean speaking competence is influenced by the language itself. So if it is a 3, the descriptive equivalent is neutral, and it means that the that the Korean speaking competence may be influenced or not by the language itself. For two, we have the descriptive equivalent for disagree, and that means that the Korean speaking competence is not influenced by the language itself. And last, we have one, which means that it is strongly disagree, and the interpretation for it is that it means that the Korean speaking competence is not totally influenced with the language itself.
Okay, now for the research theories, our study was mainly supported by the theory of Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee Werf's Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and it states that language affects perception and language affects thought patterns. Thus, language is an important tool to unravel our social life. When the language used in the context of communication, it blends with its culture. It is believed that there is a natural connection between the language spoken by someone from a social group and a social identity. Now, speaking competence can be achieved and greatly influenced with the language a learner may hear and encounter, and enable for the learner to be competent in speaking. Factors such as motivation, learner's native language, and enjoyable learning process must be considered. And these three also are our indicators for our dependent variable, which is the language influence. Now, it is also supported by the theory of David Harris, the five components of speaking skills. And it states that to be able to speak another language, you must have linguistic competence, a large vocabulary, and a solid grasp of syntax. Harris defines five components of speaking skills, the comprehension, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and fluency. And it is also our indicators to our the dependent variable, which is the speaking competence. However, linguistic proficiency is insufficient for competent communication in another language. And it is critical for the speaker to have not only language skills, but also social linguistic and conversational abilities, which allow him or her to know what to say to whom and when. And furthermore, Johnson 1995 asserts also that in order to participate in and benefit from the classroom experience, second language students require communication ability.
Now for the methods of this study. This quantitative non-experimental research design utilizing correlational technique investigate the relationship between two variables, independent and dependent, without any researchers bias or manipulating any of them. We, the researchers of this quantitative study, randomly collected a total of 200 responses from those qualified students only who are really into K-pop. Qualified participants use Google Forms to cast their answers with their optional names or nicknames. And now let's move on to the results and discussion. First, the level of language influence of K-pop. One of the variables of this study was language influence, which includes learners' native language, learners' motivation, and enjoyable learning process. As we can see to this table, it shows the summary of the language influence of the respondents. It appears that the respondents' responses generated overall mean of 3.72, which is high or much manifested and observed among the random student participants rather. Those mentioned above, all mean score was calculated by adding the mean scores of the following indicators in ascending order. 3.84 or high for enjoyable learning process with the standard deviation of 0.81. 3.79 or high for learner's motivation with a standard deviation of 0.76. 3.55 or high for learner's native language with a standard deviation of 0.92.
So now let's continue the discussion of the results for the level of speaking competence among students. So the student speaking competence in Korean language was evaluated on these parameters. So we have grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, fluency, and comprehension. So it is presented here in the table 2, the summary of the level of the speaking competence of the students. So we have the grammar, the mean for grammar is 3.95 and the SD is 0.74 with the descriptive level of high. For the vocabulary, we have 4.11 and the SD of 0.75 with a descriptive level of high. And for pronunciation, the mean is 4.18 with a standard deviation of 0.65 and descriptive level of high. For fluency, we have 3.90 with a standard deviation of 0.78 and the descriptive level of high. And lastly, we have comprehension for 3.85 and the standard deviation is 0.77 with a descriptive level of high. So the overall mean for this study have 4 and the overall standard deviation is 0.66 with a descriptive level of also high. So this indicate that the student speaking competence is highly influenced by the learning of Korean language.
Now, for the correlation between measures, whether we will be determining whether there is a significant relationship or there is not. So, Table 3 shows the relationship of language influence of K-pop to the speaking competence of students. So, as you can see on the table, the overall R value of the independent variable is 0.76. This means that the language influence of K-pop has a strong correlation to the speaking competence of students. The p-value is 0.001, which is less than the level of significance at 0.05. So this lead to the decision that the null hypothesis, which stated that there is no significant relationship between the language influence of K-pop to the speaking competence of students, is rejected. Thus, it implies that there is a significant relationship between the language influence of K-pop to the speaking competence of students. Now, jumping to the conclusion of our study, there is a high positive significant relationship between the language influence of K-pop to the speaking competence of students. Over the past years, Korean popular culture has grown significantly and penetrated neighboring Asian nations. From 2000 to 2002, one source claims that the Korean wave moved forward to diverse parts of Asia, including Southeast and Central Asia, and that wave therefore reached an active penetration stage. Now, the K-pop scene offers to its fans not only music, but also the opportunity to learn and experience new culture. As is the case with every aspect of globalization, interest in K-pop and the Korean wave is not evenly spread in every part of the Western world. Nevertheless, the hypothesis can be made that maybe through K-pop, some people has found a way to integrate its culture on a global level, which might become even more pronounced in the coming years. Korean Wave has now become a product of transnational culture, crossing borders and gaining fans all over the world. And our study is one of the examples that proves that there is really a significant relationship, that the language of the Korean or the K-pop has greatly influenced the speaking competence of the students. And that concludes our study. Again, we are the group Z3072 with the study 안녕하세요, a correlational study on the language influence of K-pop to the speaking competence of students. Thank you. Okay na. Ako mag-leave sa ko kay